Hey everyone, it's Erin with Hail Varsity, and I am joined by recruiting analyst Greg Smith for another week of your recruiting question of the week. Greg, how are you?
I am very well. I'm excited because we're at the start of spring football, so that's always good.
Yes, when you are watching this video, depending on when you watch it, spring football has either begun, is just at the end of its first practice. Basically, Monday, March 29th, marks the beginning of about 6 weeks for Nebraska leading up to the spring game. I think it's 6 weeks, 5 or 6, whatever. The spring game is Saturday, May 1st, so everything from this point forward, it's all about spring football. But the question that we have for this week, Greg, is not about spring football. So, of all things.
Right.
So, LED on Twitter asked, how often does Nebraska recruit five-star players? Are there any being recruited this year? So, there's a lot to talk about with recruiting, especially as we look forward to the dead period ending. So let's address this. Five-star players, what's the deal?
So it's tough because on one hand, every fan base obviously wants five-star players to come to their favorite school for various reasons. Number one being that they're the best players in the country, right? But also, I think that the kind of obsession amongst all fan bases, this is not particular to Nebraska, with five stars, it's kind of a status symbol, right? Like of that your team is in the kind of the college football elite. And there's a reason for that. I looked it up, and if my fuzzy math is correct, only 15 different programs signed a five-star last year in the 2021 recruiting class. So it's just not happening now. And that's because, of course, there are certain schools like Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State that almost always sign multiple of them. And there's only so many five stars per cycle, usually somewhere between 30 and 40. So they're very scarce and hard to get. And for the most part, they're located in the southeast of the United States as well. So that also plays into it. And then you start to get into the different position groups and all of that. And so to then get to the point of if Nebraska is recruiting any this year, there are not any at this point that I would feel comfortable saying like Nebraska has a great chance with them or is even really in the mix. The one that Nebraska was in the best position with, but it's kind of fallen off, is Gavin Sawchuk. He's a five-star running back out of Colorado. You'll remember the high school is Valor Christian, which is the high school that Luke McCaffrey went to. He was teammates with him for, I believe, a year. And so Nebraska was kind of in the mix for a little bit there, but that has since kind of taken a back seat in that recruitment.
Now, the one thing I will say about Nebraska recruiting, at least, well, not even Nebraska recruiting, let's just speak broadly about recruiting, is Nebraska, for example, has had very close to five-star recruits. When you think of a Thomas Fidone, these are players, when you look at like that breakdown, they're right on the cusp of they could be a five-star, but like you said, there's just not that many five stars that are given out in any given year. So Nebraska has done fairly well with and I say fairly well in the sense that like they have gotten some of those over the last few years, some of those right there on the cusp of a four-star, or if a five-star, four-star, like right there on the line. And so I think sometimes when we talk about star rankings, that can be lost is just how close some of these recruits are to that five-star note, but just didn't get it before, ultimately recruiting began for the next cycle.
Right, and I think that Fedoni is the most recent example. Before that, Turner Corcoran was very highly rated as a high four-star. Even before that, now I guess he's gone. Wandale Robinson was close to that as well. Ty Robinson wasn't that far off. Xavier Betts actually is one that I feel like I'm always having to remind people of how highly rated Xavier Betts was during his season. So there have been a handful of guys that Nebraska has. They've been closer to that status. They just haven't gotten to that level quite yet. But that also doesn't mean that Nebraska has not recruited well. I think that one of the things that you notice when you really step back and look at Nebraska's recruiting, especially during Frost's time here, is that they've recruited in a top 20 range without landing those five-star players and without having big results to actually go along with that too. So if you could it's always that chicken or the egg, right? Which comes first? Does Nebraska need those big results or better results to be able to then get that next tier of player, or can they find a way to get that next tier of player and then have those big results? We're gonna have to find out one way or the other on that one, but their rankings wise have been fine without that, though you would always want to have more talent.
And there's somebody who's watching this video right now who's like, it doesn't matter. Stars don't matter. It's about development. And I think there's a little bit of all of it. Yes, development is just as important as anything else. And, you know, that is something that I think, fans do want to see that talent recruited. They want to see that talent developed. Like you said, it's a little bit of the chicken and the egg situation and scenario. What comes first to create the other? Maybe Nebraska sees a 5-star down the line, but I think if you have, again, some of those really, really talented players that were right on the cusp of that 5-star, but are 4-stars, but I don't think any fans are, but I wouldn't write them off. I wouldn't say, oh, well, they're not incredibly talented. They just didn't get to that 5-star, that it feels sometimes more like at least in my opinion, a thing that, a recruit can then say, I was a 5-star, but, Thomas Fedoni could play like a 5-star, and then does it really matter in the end?
Right. It probably does not. It did matter to him. He did want to be a 5-star.
That's true.
But I think that was also unique because it just never happens for tight ends, right? And so he was right there on the cusp. That would have been a really cool honor to be able to say, hey, I did that. But that doesn't mean that he'll be any less good potentially in college. But it's just really interesting how that works out because the kids definitely want that honor.
Oh, yeah. And it'll be interesting to see how recruiting continues, especially with right now. If you are not actively reading the recruiting notebook every single day, you should be. Sunday's recruiting notebook touched on potentially the end of the dead period. It seems like May 31st is that end date. Nothing is official. No formal statements or announcements have been made. It's kind of just the operating belief system right now. But once that opens up, it'll be really interesting to see who Nebraska is able to get through its doors. Maybe it changes who is ultimately being recruited. There's a lot out there, and spring football kind of kicks a lot of that off. It'll be, right at the end of March, 2 months. 2 months. It'll be interesting to see what life looks like 2 months from now.
I think it will look a lot different just because of what ends up happening when guys can come to campus and you start to find out who's coming and who's not. That will shuffle boards a lot moving forward.
If you want to hear even more about this, speaking of that recruiting notebook, tonight, Monday, recruiting notebook, 6 p.m. Central. Greg will have more on this in that notebook. But also make sure you just bookmark it every day. It runs Sunday through Thursday. It's appointment reading, 6 p.m. Central every evening. You get caught up on all things recruiting. So if you are not already bookmarking that page, subscribing to Hail Varsity, really, really recommend it for everything that Greg will have for you in the next 2 months and beyond about recruiting. Greg, thank you as always. If I should say really quick, if you have any questions, you want to continue this conversation, you can do so in the comment section of this video on YouTube. Leave comments on Facebook. You can tweet at Greg Smith HV, or at Hail Varsity, whichever you prefer. And we'll be back next Monday with a new video. So get those questions coming. Greg, thank you.
Thank you. Spring football is here.
Here we go.